Thank you both so much for your time and for all the wonderful ideas you shared. I just wanted to ask this question for Tom. Can you share, particularly about a young person and finances and being in the practice, sort of them all coupled together, and sort of what it's like being a young person being in the practice, and just all sort of those three ideas together?
How much time do you have? I'll tell you a quick story. I got out of school and got into finance, and I did well at it, saved everything I could with the idea that I really wanted to go into the practice, and I thought that that was the smart thing to do. And I know other people who did the same, and one way or another, everybody has to learn you can't lean on anything but God. People learn that in different ways. The way I learned it was I lost all that I saved. When the economic crash happened, because of where my money was and a house that I had owned and thought that I was going to pay down and all kinds of things like that, crazy stuff. Squatters moved in, big, long story. Not going to get into it. Sorry, teaser. But the gist was I lost everything. And it wasn't until I lost everything that I really started looking to God to see the stuff that I need, the qualities, the characteristics that sustain me, that support me, that define me, really just come from this one source. And I knew that on one level, but I kept ping-ponging back and forth. I kept trying to use prayer to make my material stuff better, as opposed to just looking for my all in God. And the more I did that, the more I found it in a substantial and lasting way. And after that, that time where I really had to be pushed to lean entirely on God, everything after that was stable for me financially.
Just feel free to pop up if you have a question so we can see you.
Obviously, both of you, Christian Science is your whole lives. How do you keep it inspirational? And how do you keep it so that the words on the page aren't just words, but, I don't know, how do you keep excited about Christian Science, I guess?
Well, in my case, I'm not really, I don't really like to read in general. I mean,
Cover your ears, people.
except what I read here, except if the content is on spiritual, challenging myself to grow and learn something more, about this light that I have been exploring. If it's something to add to explain Christian Science better, or for me to understand how to explain metaphysics with day-to-day kind of a familiar terms, that really makes me want to read more. But in general, I don't really read. And what's really, for me, what's important is imagination and playfulness. I don't think without that I can continue to have fun. And I think it's not just kind of lightly feeling I'm having fun, because we have enough people who feel down. And I'm not a comedian, but my job is to really be a presence of light. And so sometimes I feel like a child. One of the important things for me is to really look to a child and see how they can just sit in one place and start giggling. Because they imagine something, or they have something going on. And I think the more we do that, we can make this spirituality more lively and kind of practical. So, it's not that I'm trying to be funny or anything, but other than the fact that my English is funny, I think it's important to really remember that we are still a child, that we're exploring, and I'm actually meeting other child in this playground, and I want to know what other kids are learning.
got mine. I'll just add to that a little bit and say, for me, good questions help a lot. Stuff I really care about. If I pick up and just read in the abstract, it doesn't always hit me. But if I go to it really yearning, I used that word a few minutes ago, with a real question, something I really want to know, then I find that things speak to me. And then it's not just me trying to do something with it, it's me feeling like the child in the equation, being spoken to, being uplifted, being educated. When you feel that kind of a relationship with the ideas, it stays very alive. And it always feels new. You can read the same thing over and over, and it will feel like something new. The other part of it to me is using what you get. If you take the little bit you get and you do something with it, then when you go back and you look at something again, you get a whole new thing out of it. Mary Baker Eddy just kind of walks around this one subject of the one infinite God and keeps looking at it, describing it, talking about it in different ways. But it's like every time you get back to where you were before, what you learned on the previous go about has made the next go about look totally different. And so I just find it's a whole new book for me when I'm living it and asking big questions all the time.
Yeah, thank you, both of you. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you deal with sort of the absolute truth, but then how you, I guess, progress through daily life and sort of unfold in a natural way, and like, what's the pace of that, and how do you? I just find myself often grappling with like, I'm not making progress quickly enough, or I'm not. Like, God is all, but I'm not, I haven't ascended yet. So that's basically what I'm wondering. Yeah.
Now, I read something once that said, love is so loving that we experience it in the way that makes us feel most loved. That means in the most tangible ways. The definition that Mrs. Eddy gives to Christ in the Glossary of Science and Health is the divine manifestation of God come to the flesh to destroy incarnate error. She doesn't even say the seeming flesh or whatever. It's not. There's nothing abstract about it. It's like right where you are or you think you are or whatever's going on, that's where it comes. So when this idea of a God that is all feels very separate from where we are, it's helpful to know that this God is so good, is as good can be. And good wouldn't be as good can be if it didn't feel relevant, if it didn't speak to us in the way that made the most sense right where we are, leavened exactly what was going on right at that time, comforted exactly what needed to be comforted, showed the way to the most beautiful things that were tangible and palpable right here and now. There's God, which is just perfect, and there's the way we experience God by degrees, step by step. And that's the breaking through or the breaking in on our experience of this all goodness of God. But it should never and can never feel separate from our daily walk, or it's not really God, because that's not how God works. The goodness of God is so good that we experience it in just the most relevant ways right here and now. And if we're not, then we can kind of step back for a second and reorient a little bit on that goodness of God and even demand that of our relationship with God until we start seeing that breaking through in a tangible way again.
Well, that really is helpful. And I think when I look at the Jesus' life, and we think that he's almost always successful. But I always like to also point out that he had disappointments too. And then he probably, as a master, felt like almost failing a student. And have you ever thought of Judas, who not only betrayed himself but ended up killing himself? But he never really mentions about, well, I could have really stopped him, that I somehow didn't teach him enough. But I think his view on life is much more I guess his view is infinite. So he's not really thinking like just here on earth experience, fail or, succeed. But I think it's most important to always feel like God is at work. Always bring God in the center. If I put myself in the center, of course I'm going to be disappointed about myself and how I'm thinking about something, or how others may not be able to understand me. But I think what Mrs. Eddy really asks us to do is to find that unselfed love, which is to almost removing yourself, although you're still there, but being a witness. And say, well, instead of focusing on what is not the way you think is supposed to be. And I have days that I'm probably feeling like I just want to just lay down and not do anything. But I'm observing myself, and somehow gets picked up when I'm called to work for someone else. And I think it really helps us to have a time to forget ourselves. When you're playing basketball, you're not really thinking of yourself. You're thinking about ball getting into that basket. I don't think you even know how you're moving because you're so into it. So I think in practice and also in daily lives, that yes, we get really great inspiration in the morning and something happens and we feel like we're defeated. But I think every time this happens, we just need to really see God picks me up. And only when I'm working for God and I'm working for His children, that I can really experience this unself love that gives us more power. So one of the practices that I asked this year for my student is when something tries to creep up in your thinking, saying like, I'm not doing well, just immediately say, God. Immediately erase it. Because the more we give this time to kind of feel bad about yourself or the world, the longer it just seems like trying to have attacking our own selves or our group who is trying to study Christian Science. So that's how I feel, that the longer view of the span that Jesus felt like infinite is what He's working in. And even Mrs. Eddy says it takes eternity to understand God. It's not like toilsome thing. It's like, okay, today I'm going to learn this much. Well, maybe I didn't learn this much today. But be really kind to yourselves. I think that's part of Thomas saying, don't forget that love. That's unconditional love.
Hi. This is still a question that's forming in my mind at the moment, so I'll try to be concise. We use the term man in Christian Science to represent kind of ourselves as the universal idea of God. I have been wondering, or kind of maybe struggling with the idea of how we come to terms with the fact that in human experience, the idea of a universal man is kind of a European Enlightenment idea that's often used by people, or has been used by people, to marginalize indigenous peoples or communities of color. And I'm wondering how we can start to come to terms with that term, man, a little bit. And I know that that's a material association, but we are in this experience right now, and I think there is a little bit of danger in universalizing when people feel that they may be marginalized by that universalization. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Do you mean man as in seeing more as a gender?
No, I just mean the way that we use the term man to represent ourselves universally as an idea of God.
Mm-hmm. Well, my take on this whole idea of man is, as I was speaking in my lecture, when God said light, He meant all the lights. When God said flower, He meant all the flowers. And infinite varieties of flowers and infinite hues and colors and shapes of flowers, and even within its own same tulips, maybe the same color, none of the flowers exactly the same. But the only thing you need to say is flower. And to me, that the term man simply means the representation of this one idea that we have, but it comes in an infinite expression. So for me, that's how I understand it. I don't feel it's European or, excluding other people. But it just, to me, if there's an idea that needs to be said in one word, but just to understand that expression of that and coming through, you can say the prisms and the light having so many different colors coming out of it, it's infinite expression that we're really focusing on. It's just happened to say, like, there's a light, there's man, there's some idea that we can really think about, and all the rest of the experiences that we have on this earth is part of that one word. Do you have anything to say?
I think putting language to spiritual concepts is a tough thing. I mean, so I manage the church's board of lectureship. I have been for a little while. There's been lots of managers. I'm in the role right now. But it means I help train new lecturers. And people who come in who are practicing this and have been for a long time often, think it's going to be easy, and then you start trying to wrap your tongue around it, and it's like, oh, anyone who's tried to talk to a friend before, you know what you feel, and then you're like, it just takes practice. Mrs. Eddy even said it multiple times in multiple ways in her writings, that this was hard for her to wrap language, human language, around something that is really kind of bigger than that. But she used the language that was authentic to her time. And I think her authenticity, to me, is what shines through. I think if you may have noticed, I didn't use the word man when I spoke at all. At least I don't think I did. I don't usually do. It's not as authentic to me. I tend to talk about more like just we and us. So, if I start speaking in Victorian language, it's not going to seem authentic. But when you read Mary Baker Eddy, you know it's authentic. So it feels different when you engage with it, I think, than if you read a book by a modern day author trying to write like a 19th century author. So I don't think her words or her way of expressing get old because they're always going to be authentic, and because when you understand the concept behind the words, as Fujiko was talking about her sense of the meaning of the concept of man, then the words are just a symbol. And the words, you get beneath the words to the idea, and the idea resonates with you. The idea transforms you. And at that point, you don't really care anymore. It's like, when I first started lecturing, I only spoke to youth audiences, and people thought, oh, you got to get somebody young to talk to the young people because they'll think they're cool. And what I found was I would be at summits like this, and somebody could come in, 4 times my age, and if they were real, if they were authentic, if there was real love, if there was healing going on, nobody cared about the age. The packaging was irrelevant. So I think what people yearn for maybe more today than ever is that authenticity. And Mary Baker Eddy is authentic. So she has her way, and it shines through her writing clearer than anything I've ever read. But it doesn't mean necessarily you'll use all of the same words. You'll have your own authentic way of explaining it, and the more you understand the idea behind it, the more it'll shine through you in your own way.
Sounds good. We've got one question here and one question there, and then I think those are the only 2 questions we'll have time for, but they will also be here if other people want to ask questions. Go for it.
So my question is about, so we're supposed to pray without ceasing, but we're also supposed to be praying in our closet, and then how does that mix into real life?
Never leave your closet. I was just talking, do you mind? I was just talking to some friends a week or 2 ago about this word yearning. If you go, and Mrs. Eddy says desire is prayer, right? And if you really look across her writings, there's a lot of this yearning. It's not just the moment you're specifically thinking something or kind of affirming something true about God, but that state of heart that is open to God, responding to God, seeing God, desiring to know more about God, hungering and thirsting after God. That's something you can do all the time. And if we define prayer that way, then to me, that can happen easily without ceasing. It's a state of heart more than some outward form of what you're doing. There are many outward forms, but the state of heart of true prayer can be going on all the time.
Well, I found an interesting reference to the word closet when I wrote the lecture many, many times on the Lord's Prayer. That word closet also is associated with the word present and now. So if you're going into now, it's not only ceaseless because you're constantly in now. What I just said a moment ago is already not relevant. But if I'm staying in the now, it means I don't bring in the past nor the future, but I have to be really aware of a person in front of me, really listening and listening to my own self, but also listening to God. So I think being in closet is not separate from being with the rest of us, and also having one idea in our consciousness. As Tom was saying, you cannot have two opposing ideas in your own mind. If I'm thinking red, it has to be red. It cannot be like a red-yellow. So it's holding one thought at a time that is really precious to you. You keep it in your consciousness, and that's already a prayer. And then to me, it's the base of all this is love. Unless we have deep sense of love for God and our fellow man, why should we care? Just what goes through my mind. We can just leave it open, and what comes and what goes, I don't care. But if we really care about our own selves, but also other, our brothers and sisters, light sisters and brothers, then it's natural for you to be alert, and sometimes without knowing you are praying. So.
Okay, and here's our last one back here.
Thank you, both of you, for your lectures this morning. Fujiko, in your lecture this morning, you said, and I'm not quoting you exactly, but you said, science is about understanding the universe with the intention to bring unity to the world. So my question is, how do you use Christian Science to bring unity to the world? And Tom, would love to hear your thoughts on this too.
Well, science, as I had said, the original meaning of science is to understand our universe and our existence here. And why? It's just so that we will be enlightened, that we understand, as he was talking about, all the discoveries, that things have been covered. We're only discovering to see what is underneath. And so the part of Christian really is just an adjective. It's not a religion to me. It's really the quality of science that we're looking for. And what Christian really means is to have that sense of love. And what love brings is unity, not division. What love brings is understanding and not ignorance. What love brings is a sense of patience and listening ability. So to me, Christian Science is a type of science, but it's the highest sense of science that we can call it divine science, but divine science will apply to the rest of the whole universe, whereas on this earth, we need that Christian part. And you may not say Christian, because I have Muslim friends who would study science and health. To them, it's that whatever they're studying, applying, and to bring the harmony of life and love, as Mrs. Eddy talks about. That it's not the ritualistic thing, that we're not bringing those to our lives. Even the word faith to me, but how Jesus uses, is not religious faith. It's the understanding of who we are, how we're connected to God. And if we are connected to God, there has to be unity. It has to be. There's no division in God's mathematics. It's always addition and multiplication. No subtraction or division.
I guess I would put what Fujiko said in my own words, because I thought that was just very helpful. The unity already exists, right? So science is understanding what's already there. So that's how science unifies. The more we see from God's point of view, the more we see ourselves as family. The more we see one truth, even if there are many different expressions or ways of articulating it, it's not my truth and your truth. It's not subjective, it's not relative. It's just the one and only. I started my first day as a chaplain in the Los Angeles County prisons, and I remember sitting in the parking lot before I went in thinking, why would these people listen to me? Who am I? When they're going to look up there and they're going to see this guy, like, what do I have to do anything with what they've been through? You know? And I went in and I just, what came to me was, it's not about you. You're there to watch God work. You're there to listen to God's word. And that's ultimately what it felt like. It was about, you know, sometimes I was stuff coming out of my mouth and it was like I was standing on the side going, oh, that's good, God. I didn't know that. and you know, I had great relationships. So if you take the God out of it and you have somebody coming from my little background and the background of some of the wide diversity of people I met in the prison, I might get along with some and not other, just personality-wise or commonality, the TV shows we watch or whatever. But you get to the God level, and suddenly we're family. I mean, those guys, they wouldn't even curse in front of me. They were just, if they let a word slip, they'd say, oh, I'm sorry. They called me all kinds of things, pastor or father, whatever. They didn't know what to call me, but... But that was the kind of respect they had for what we were doing, for what we were talking about. We felt so unified like family. When we grow spiritually, it doesn't push us away from people. It brings us together. It helps us understand each other and what's real. And everyone else ultimately wants that too.
Excellent. Huge thanks to Tom and Fujiko.